I still remember the day I decided to embark on this solo expedition into the woods. The locals had warned me about the dark legends that lingered within those trees, but I never believed them. I'm a seasoned adventurer, after all. My focus was set on setting up an ominous atmosphere and establishing my bravery and determination. I packed light, bringing only the essentials: a backpack with food, water, and a first aid kit, as well as a reliable camera to capture any evidence of the paranormal activity I was about to encounter. As I stepped into the forest, the canopy overhead seemed to swallow me whole, casting deep shadows that stretched and twisted in the fading light. The air was heavy with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves, and I could feel the weight of the woods gaze upon me. I had chosen this location carefully, seeking a spot where the trees grew thick and the underbrush was dense. My plan was to spend the night here, setting up camp and waiting for whatever it was that lived in these woods to reveal itself. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the forest in an eerie twilight glow, I began to set up my makeshift shelter. The rustling of leaves and snapping of twigs underfoot seemed amplified in this silence, making me feel like I was being herded towards some unknown fate. I tried to shake off the feeling, telling myself it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. But as night began to fall and the stars twinkled above, I couldn't shake the sense that I was being watched. The trees seemed to loom over me, their branches like skeletal fingers reaching out to snatch me from this mortal coil. I tried to focus on the task at hand, setting up a small fire to ward off the chill of the night air, but my mind kept wandering back to the legends the locals had spoken of. They said that this forest was home to an entity known only as the Devourer, a being that fed on the fear and terror of those who dared to enter its domain. I laughed it off as mere superstition, but now, as I sat by my fire, listening to the wind rustle through the trees, I couldn't help but wonder if there was truth to those tales. I tried to focus on the sound of the crackling fire, but my ears kept picking up strange occurrences in the forest. At first, it was just the occasional hoot of an owl or the rustle of leaves underfoot. But as the night wore on, the sounds became more frequent and more intense. I heard whispers in the wind, soft and raspy, like someone was trying to convey a message but couldn't quite find the words. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end as I strained to listen, but whenever I thought I made out something, it would fade away into silence. I tried to convince myself it was just my imagination playing tricks on me, but deep down, I knew that wasn't true. The forest seemed to be shifting around me, the trees looming closer and farther apart in a way that made me feel disoriented and lost. I stumbled over roots and fallen branches, my footprints seeming to echo through the forest like I was being followed by unseen hands. Every now and then, I would catch a glimpse of something out of the corner of my eye, a flash of movement, a flicker of light, but whenever I turned to look, there would be nothing. The wind picked up, sending leaves swirling around me like a mad dance. I felt like I was being pulled into some kind of vortex, unable to escape the pull of the forest's dark energy. I tried to stay calm, telling myself it was just the storm that was brewing on the horizon, but my heart was racing, and my skin was crawling with goosebumps. I knew I had to get out of there, to find shelter from this supernatural force that seemed to be closing in around me. But as I turned to make my way back to camp, I realized that I was lost. The trees seemed to have shifted once again, and I was no longer sure which direction I had come from. Panic started to set in, my breath coming in short gasps as I frantically scanned my surroundings for any sign of civilization. But there was nothing. Just the dark, silent forest, watching me with an unblinking gaze. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being led deeper into the woods, as if some unseen force was guiding me towards a specific destination. The trees seemed to loom over me, their branches tangling together like skeletal fingers. I had always been drawn to the darker side of history, and this forest was like a living, breathing embodiment of those stories. The legends whispered about in hushed tones, the ancient rituals performed under the light of the full moon, the sacrifices made to appease the forest spirits, the whispers of an otherworldly presence that lurked just beyond the tree line. I felt a shiver run down my spine as I pieced together the stories, each one weaving into the next like a thread in a tapestry of fear and foreboding. The wind picked up, carrying with it the faint scent of decay and rot. I knew then that I was getting close to something, a threshold beyond which there was no turning back. The forest seemed to be holding its breath, waiting for me to take the next step into the unknown. My heart pounded in my chest as I steeled myself for what lay ahead. I had always been drawn to the edge of sanity, and now it seemed that I was staring straight into the abyss. The trees seemed to close in around me, their branches whispering in a language that only the wind could hear. I knew then that I was not alone in this place. Something else was here with me, something that watched me with cold, calculating eyes. And yet, despite the creeping sense of dread that filled my veins, I couldn't help but feel a thrill of excitement. What secrets lay hidden in the heart of this forest? What terrors awaited those who dared to venture too far into its depths? As I delved deeper into the forest, I began to experience strange visions and auditory hallucinations. The trees seemed to be shifting and morphing around me, their branches like grasping fingers that reached out to snatch at my clothes. I heard whispers in my ear, soft and raspy, but whenever I turned to listen, there was no one there. The wind carried with it the scent of decay and rot, but beneath that, I detected a sweet, floral note that sent shivers down my spine. I felt like I was trapped in a dream, where reality and sanity were two sides of the same coin. The trees seemed to be watching me, their bark twisted into grotesque grins that seemed to mock me with their silence. I stumbled through the underbrush, my feet tangling in the roots of ancient trees that loomed above me like sentinels. Every now and then, a bird would take flight, its wings beating out a staccato rhythm that echoed through the forest like a drumbeat. But it wasn't just the sounds that unsettled me. It was the feeling that I was being pulled apart at the seams, my very sense of self unraveling like a thread pulled from a sweater. I felt like I was losing myself in this place, like I was being consumed by some ancient, malevolent force that had lain dormant for centuries. And yet, despite the creeping sense of dread that filled my veins, I couldn't help but feel drawn to it, like a moth to a flame. What was real and what wasn't? What was happening to me and why? The forest seemed to be hiding secrets from me, secrets that only the trees themselves knew. And I was determined to uncover them, no matter the cost. As I navigated through the forest, I began to notice that the shadows seemed to be moving of their own accord. At first, it was just a slight movement out of the corner of my eye, but soon the shadows were twisting and writhing like living things. They seemed to be following me, always lurking just out of sight. The air grew colder, and the sense of dread that had been building inside me began to escalate. I could feel the weight of the forest's gaze upon me, a crushing pressure that threatened to suffocate me. Every step I took felt like a betrayal, as if I was abandoning my own path and walking into the heart of darkness itself. The trees seemed to be closing in around me, their branches tangling together above my head like skeletal fingers. I stumbled forward, my senses reeling from the disorienting shifts in the forest's layout. One moment I would see a clearing ahead of me, but when I reached it, there would be nothing there except a wall of trees that seemed to stretch on forever. The shadows danced around me, their movements seemingly choreographed to my every step. I felt like I was trapped in some kind of twisted maze, with no escape from the horrors that lurked within. And yet, despite the overwhelming sense of fear that gripped me, I couldn't help but feel drawn deeper into the heart of the forest. What secrets lay hidden beneath its twisted surface? What terrors waited for me in the darkness? The protagonist discovers a hollowed-out tree with strange symbols etched into its bark. This discovery serves as a turning point in the story, marking the beginning of a catastrophic descent into madness. As I walked through the forest, I stumbled upon a massive tree unlike any I had ever seen before. Its trunk was gnarled and twisted, with deep grooves carved into its surface. But what caught my attention were the strange symbols etched into the bark itself. They seemed to be some sort of language, but I couldn't decipher their meaning. I reached out a trembling hand to touch the symbols, feeling a shiver run down my spine as I did so. The tree seemed to loom over me, its branches reaching up towards the sky like skeletal fingers. I felt a sense of unease wash over me, as if I was being watched by unseen eyes. As I stood there, frozen in awe and fear, I began to hear whispers. At first, they were soft and indistinct, but soon grew louder and more urgent. The words themselves were meaningless, but the tone was unmistakable, a cold, mirthless laughter that sent shivers down my spine. I tried to step back, but my feet seemed rooted to the spot. The whispers grew louder still, until I could feel them vibrating through every cell of my body. It was as if the tree itself was speaking to me, its voice a dark and malevolent presence in my mind. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, everything went silent. The whispers stopped, the symbols on the tree seemed to fade away, and I was left standing there, feeling shaken and confused. But I knew that I had only scratched the surface of something much deeper and darker. The tree's secrets were still waiting for me, hidden in its twisted heart like a malevolent spirit waiting to be unleashed. I took a step back, my mind reeling with the implications of what I had discovered. What did the symbols mean? Who or what was speaking to me through them? And what lay at the heart of this ancient tree, waiting to consume me whole? As the protagonist approached the heart of the forest, they were met with an increasing tempest of storms and unrelenting darkness. The atmosphere grew more oppressive, reflecting the turmoil within the protagonist's mind. The trees seemed to twist and writhe around me, their branches like skeletal fingers reaching out to snare me. The air was thick with electricity, and I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end. Every step I took felt like a betrayal, as if I was abandoning my own path and walking into the heart of madness itself. The storms raged around me, their thunder booming through the forest like a drumbeat in my mind. The lightning flashed, casting eerie shadows on the trees. I stumbled forward, blinded by the flashes of light and deafened by the thunderous roar of the storm. But it was not just the external world that was wild and untamed. My own mind was a maelstrom of conflicting emotions, my thoughts racing with fears and doubts. I felt myself unraveling, thread by thread, as if the very fabric of my sanity was about to snap. And yet, despite the chaos around me, I pressed on, driven by some morbid fascination with the heart of the forest. I had to know what secrets lay hidden there, secrets that would either save me or consume me whole. As I walked deeper into the forest, the storm intensified, the winds howling and the lightning flashing more fiercely than ever before. I felt like I was walking into the very abyss itself, with no safety net to catch me if I fell. But still I went on, my heart pounding in my chest, my mind reeling with the implications of what I might find at the heart of the forest. For in that moment, I knew that I was staring into the face of madness, and I was not sure which side would emerge victorious. As I ventured deeper into the forest, I was confronted by an unseen force that seemed to emanate from the very core of the trees. It was as if the forest itself had come alive and was now exerting a malevolent influence over me. The air grew colder and the shadows deepened until it seemed as though I was walking through a tunnel of darkness. I could feel eyes upon me, watching me, weighing me, and yet I saw nothing. Suddenly, a figure stepped out of the shadows. It was faceless, its features blurred and indistinct. Its presence was both captivating and terrifying, like a siren's call that drew me in with an otherworldly allure. I felt a shiver run down my spine as the figure began to move towards me. Its pace was slow and deliberate, as if it were savoring every moment of our encounter. I tried to step back, but my feet seemed rooted to the spot. The faceless figure loomed closer, its presence filling my entire field of vision. I felt like I was drowning in a sea of darkness, with no escape in sight. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the figure vanished. The shadows receded, and the air grew warm once more. I stood there, trembling with fear, wondering if I had really seen what I thought I saw, or if it was all just a product of my fevered imagination. But as I looked down at my hands, I realized that something was different. My fingers seemed to be moving on their own, as if they were being guided by an unseen force. I felt a creeping sense of dread as I realized that I was no longer in control of my own body. The faceless figure had left me with a terrible gift, the knowledge that I was not alone, and that there were forces beyond my comprehension at work in the world. I stumbled back through the forest, my mind reeling with questions and fears. What did it mean to be alive? Was I still sane? Or was I just a puppet, dancing on strings controlled by forces beyond my understanding? As I stumbled through the forest, the trees seemed to close in around me. The air was heavy with an otherworldly presence, and I could feel eyes upon me, watching me, waiting for me to make a wrong move. I knew that I had to keep moving, but my legs felt like lead, as if they were rooted to the spot. Suddenly, a massive tree loomed before me, its trunk twisted and gnarled with age. The branches seemed to reach out like skeletal fingers, grasping for me like bony hands. I stumbled closer, feeling an inexplicable pull towards the tree. As I approached, I saw that the trunk was hollow, the wood worn away in a circular pattern. It looked like a doorway, a portal to another world. I hesitated for a moment, wondering if I should enter. But something compelled me to step forward to see what lay beyond the threshold of the tree. As I passed through the opening, I felt a sudden jolt, as if time itself had been twisted and distorted. The air around me seemed to ripple and distort, like the surface of a pond on a summer's day. I stumbled forward, my eyes adjusting slowly to the dim light within. The interior of the tree was a labyrinth of twisting tunnels and narrow corridors, each one lined with ancient symbols and cryptic messages. I wandered deeper into the heart of the tree, feeling like a rat in a maze, searching for a way out. But the more I walked, the more I realized that I was not alone. There were others here, whispering to me from the shadows, their voices like the rustling of leaves. They spoke in riddles and parables, their words dripping with meaning and hidden truths. I listened, entranced, as they revealed secrets about the nature of reality itself. What was real? What was not? The lines between truth and illusion blurred and shifted, like sand on a beach, and I knew that I would never be able to see the world in the same way again. As the storm raged on, the protagonist found themselves trapped in an endless cycle of time loops and hallucinations. They were forced to confront the darkest aspects of their own psyche, with no escape from the abyss of madness. The world around them was a blurred mess of colors and sounds, like a fevered dream from which they couldn't awaken. Every step felt like a struggle, as if they were wading through quicksand. The wind howled in their ears, a cacophony of despair that seemed to sear itself into their very soul. They stumbled forward, driven by some unseen force, their legs trembling beneath them like leaves in an autumn gale. Every step felt like a betrayal, as if they were selling out to the darkness within. The shadows danced around them, grotesque silhouettes that seemed to mock their every move. The protagonist's mind reeled, torn apart by conflicting emotions and thoughts. How could they be certain of anything? Was reality even real? The questions swirled in their head like a vortex, sucking them down into the depths of madness. And yet, despite it all, they pressed on, driven by some maddening compulsion to confront the darkness head-on. The storm raged on, a living, breathing entity that seemed to feed off their fear and despair. It was as if the very fabric of reality was unraveling before them, leaving only chaos and destruction in its wake. The protagonist's grip on sanity faltered, like a thread pulled from a sweater. They were left standing alone, lost in a world of madness, with no escape from the abyss that yawned open before them. I stumbled through the veil, my mind shattered by the revelations that awaited me. The sinister force that had been manipulating me throughout my journey was finally laid bare before me. I saw myself standing at the edge of a precipice, staring into an abyss of darkness. And in that moment, I realized that I was no longer human. My soul had been consumed by an ancient and malevolent entity, leaving behind only an empty shell of humanity. The memories of my past life were distant echoes, haunting reminders of what I once knew. My eyes felt like they were staring into the very depths of hell itself, and yet I couldn't look away. The darkness seemed to seep into every pore of my being, infecting me with its malevolent presence. I was no longer in control. I was a puppet on strings, danced by an unseen force. My thoughts were filled with despair and hopelessness, as if I had lost all sense of purpose. And yet, amidst the chaos, I saw a glimmer of something else, a spark of recognition that I was not alone in this existence. There were others out there, trapped in their own webs of madness, struggling to find their way back to humanity. The thought gave me a fleeting sense of hope, but it was short-lived. For as I looked deeper into the abyss, I saw my own reflection staring back at me, a hollow shell of a person, devoid of emotions or compassion. I was no longer human. I was something else entirely. A monster, forged in the depths of madness and darkness. The darkness closed in around me, like a shroud of eternal night. I was trapped in a realm where time had no meaning, and the laws of physics were but a distant memory. The horrors that I had faced on my journey seemed to recede into the background as I gazed out upon a landscape of twisted, eldritch beauty. The sky was a deep, bloody red, and the trees seemed to writhe and twist like living things. In this realm, the very fabric of reality was torn apart, revealing glimpses of a higher dimension. It was as if I had transcended the bounds of mortality and had gazed upon the abyss that lay beyond. And in that moment, I knew that I was no longer human. I was something more, something ancient, something old. The darkness seemed to coalesce around me, taking on a life of its own. It wrapped itself around my soul like a shroud, and I felt myself being pulled towards the very heart of madness. And yet, even as I was consumed by the abyss, I knew that I had transcended the limits of human understanding. I had gazed upon the face of eternity and had emerged forever changed. The darkness closed in around me once more, and I was gone, my story would remain unfinished, a haunting echo of terror that would linger on in the hearts of those who dared to read it. For in the end, it is not the horrors that lurk in the darkness that define us, but rather our own capacity for transcendence.